evening, if you didn't manage to see the first slide with the title on, is Abundant Life in Time of Climate Crisis. So we're going to be looking at this reading from Isaiah, and we're going to be looking about like what the context was in the ancient world and how we can apply it to now in a time of increasing climate change. So the title, which I took out of this, but the heading of this passage is An Invitation to Abundant Life. And I think G's going to read it for us.
Hear, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy?
There is a second page which I will turn to.
Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen so that you may live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. See, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for the peoples. Now you shall call nations that you do not know, and nations that do not know you shall run to you, because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you.
Thank you very much. And our second passage is a very short one, and David will read it for us.
This comes from Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth.
Thank you. And the little photo there is of the Google data centre in Hertfordshire in 2025. So before we get into the climate crisis of it all, and like the blight of AI data centres onto like the fabric of our land and culture, let's talk a little bit about the book of Isaiah. So it's a really long book. It was traditionally ascribed to the prophet Isaiah ben Amos, who had lived in the 8th century BCE. But modern scholars are kind of like, okay, well, I don't think he wrote all of that. I think that it was split into three main parts. And it's likely that actually lots of this book was written or edited by different people over the course of centuries. And so basically the first part is Isaiah warning to corrupt leaders in Israel and Judah that the expansion of the neighbouring Assyrian Empire would have dire consequences for their kingdoms. And basically, so Isaiah was a prophet, and prophet back in those days was kind of a job. But it was kind of a job for terrible people, and so the kings would be surrounded by lots of people who were prophets, but who were being paid by them, who would essentially just tell them what they wanted to hear. So kings would have essentially lots of yes men around them who would essentially say, yeah, you're doing great, you're actually doing fantastic, all of this idol worship and like oppression of your people, that's fine, God's chill with that. And so Isaiah and a couple of the other prophets that we hear in the Bible, such as Amos, they're basically freelancers. They're like, okay, you don't pay me, and therefore I'm going to say what God wants me to say and not what you want to hear. So this is kind of where the phrase speaking truth to power comes from, because these are people who are not powerful culturally, but who have something to say from God, and they deem that more important than like the safety of themselves or like their popularity. So essentially, Isaiah is going to the kings of Israel and Judah, which at the time are split into north and south kingdoms, and he's saying, the way you are treating the people is awful, and it will incur God's wrath. Look at the expansion of the Assyrian Empire. This is going to be disastrous for you. And so basically, he's trying to call them back to the covenant that they have with God, because a covenant works both ways. You can't not follow it and expect God to follow the other half. So basically, Isaiah is like, we need to start treating people properly. We need to stop doing idol worship, otherwise there's going to have consequences. So that's the first third of the book of Isaiah. The second third is set during the Babylonian exile. So this is after the Assyrian Empire. The Babylonians come on after them, and they kind of subsume lots of Israel and Judah into themselves. And so this is, again, why people are like, I don't think Isaiah wrote all of that, because this happened like several hundred years later. And I think that guy's probably dead. So, but the point of ascribing the whole book to Isaiah is to be like, this is including the legitimacy that Isaiah affords us. And it's a continuation of a narrative that doesn't necessarily have to have been written completely by this man. So yeah, the second part, which is where our passage comes from, was written during the Babylonian exile, which is like a major existential threat to the Israelites' whole way of life and way of being in the world. So this is a people who are rooted in place, and their worship is rooted in place. You know, they have a big temple, and God lives there. That's where God lives, right? God doesn't live anywhere else other than in this temple, which is why it's so special to them. And then the Babylonian Empire comes along and scatters them throughout the diaspora and destroys the temple. So the people who are living in Babylon are faced with this really, really existential threat, existential crisis, where they are a people of place, and that place is no longer theirs. God's house is no longer there, so where is God? And who are we as people if we are not there, and if God doesn't live there anymore? And so it's a real time of great lamentation for the Israelites. That's where a lot of Lamentations, the book, comes from. And because the Babylonian Empire is trying to essentially assimilate them into their culture, water down their cultural practices and their beliefs. And so they're really faced with this existential dread of who are we as a people? Do we have a consistent identity as a people if we are no longer living there and God is no longer living in that temple because it's destroyed? And so that's why this passage for today is so hopeful. A lot of the second part of Isaiah is okay, so we had the doom and gloom of the first part, where I was telling you to get your house in order, and then you didn't, and then so now we're in exile. And so this is why this is so hopeful. Because it looks forward to a time where God will fulfill all of God's promises. So I just want to read a little bit of that again for you. So here, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy? There's a lot of invitation in there. Come, do this, buy this, without money. God is inviting the Israelites into a different way of seeing the world, because they are in a place of exile. They are in a place of deep lamentation. And God is saying, I'm still here. I'm still here. And furthermore, we can live in a life of abundance, even though materially you're not doing so great right now, on account of being in exile, etc. So God is inviting them to see a world that is different than the one that they're living in. It's a real act of hope. And, God is talking about wine and milk, but a lot of, that's kind of metaphorical. God is talking about a spiritual practice. God is talking about things that aren't just wine or aren't just milk. God is inviting them to consider everything else, what sustains them that isn't bread. Similarly, God is inviting us to consider what sustains you that is not bread or milk or wine. What sustains you that is past the material needs of your survival. God is inviting us to a place beyond money, beyond greed, beyond striving for things that do not satisfy. It's an invitation to try and live from a place of abundance and not scarcity, which obviously is easier said than done. Money is a huge part of our life. You know, it can be exchanged for goods and services, for instance, and you know, we need it. There's no way currently that you can get by without it. But I think what we can consider is that money isn't all there is. What sustains you, what is life-giving to you, that is not born from material possession? You know, is it your friends? Is it your family? Is it your community? What are you doing outside of work? Do you exist just to go to work and then come home and watch TV and go to bed? Like, what is the shape of your life outside of that? Do you find that you are being fulfilled? Or are you feeling like you're just in the rat race? You know? And what can you do to try and think about sustaining a life outside? Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread and your earnings for that which does not satisfy? You know, money is a huge part of our lives, and you know, to link it into the climate crisis of it all, as I'm going to do in a minute, money is a huge part of the way that the world operates. But capitalism has fashioned itself into an idol. It has taken the face of greed, called it progress, and demanded our compliance. And God is inviting us to look beyond that. We now live in a landscape that is fundamentally changed. Currently, the UK entirely is in drought. There are wildfires everywhere. That's a picture of one that is recently, and you know, that was in Glenavon, and you can smell it in Cardiff when it was at its peak. You can smell it in Caerphilly. There you go. So stuff's on fire, you know, and not even metaphorically, like literally actually on fire. You know, temperatures are between 36 and 40 degrees, hundreds of excess heat deaths. And what's the response? There's no emergency rollout of cooling centres, or mandatory grounding of private jets, or making polluters pay. Instead, there are new data centres that are being planned and built all around us. There's one that is being planned for Llanymyney, and they're going to tear down the Park and Ride and build an AI data centre there. This is not good. A little bit about data centres, just very briefly. So, the reason why they're so bad for the environment is because AI, generative AI, when you ask it to do something, it requires a huge amount of processing power to deliver your request. And that processing power is not, you know, in the cloud, it's physical. It's in servers that are stacked on top of each other in rows and rows and rows and rows in massive warehouses. And if you think about your laptop, if you use it for too long, it gets too hot. Well, that's what's happening to all of these servers, all of these stacks and stacks and stacks of the physical mechanism by which AI is processing your request. And all of that necessitates a massive amount of cooling, because otherwise it will just overheat. So that's where water comes in. The cooling systems for these data centres uses our drinking water, and it's not sustainable. The Environmental Agency said recently that there is not enough water to supply everyone, plus the amount of new data centres that are being built. They don't have enough water. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy? The passage from Isaiah is an invitation into the abundance of life. The reading of Matthew is a warning about greed, and both can be read hand in hand when we confront the climate crisis. I've just thrown that definition up on there for techno-feudalism. I think it's just a really interesting way of describing what we kind of see now, which is that large tech companies own and control a lot of our data, a lot of our platforms, and a lot of our online life, in the same way that feudal lords did back in the day. And similarly with the feudal lord system, you can't really opt out. You know, the integration of AI into like normal online functions is really pervasive. I do all I can to not use it at work, but I'm sure that there are things that are like integrated that I can't turn off. Do you know what I mean? And like, I didn't ask for that. I don't want it, but it's there. And that is techno-feudalism. So, I want you to think about that passage from Isaiah, where God is inviting us to look forward to the future with hope. But I also want you to sit with what we're currently seeing now. We cannot compartmentalise our faith and our politics, our actions and our spending habits. Like the Israelites in Isaiah, we are staring down an existential threat. Yeah? So what can we do about it? Obviously, I don't have all the answers. If I did, I would just do it. There's a lot of terrible, horrible news going around, and that can feel really, really heavy. But I think it's important to resist doomerism. You know, there are people paying a lot of money to fuel this narrative of it's too late and therefore we just won't bother. Because even if we miss climate targets, it is never too late to meet the next ones, and everything we do in service of a better tomorrow is better than giving up. A way that you can make a difference locally is supporting your local, I don't know, like allotments. It's looking at your bank, you know, are they ethical? Where is your pension stored? Like, where is that money being held? What impact does that have? And you can get involved locally with campaigns against data centres. So the one that I mentioned earlier in Llanrumney, there is a local campaign against it, and there's like an official consultation that's open now, so you can, you know, have your say in an official capacity. And I think, just to bring it back to the passage from Isaiah again, do not spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy. If you're getting caught up in the rat race of it all, Isaiah is there to say that there is another way, and we should try. Yeah? So this is a poem from the poet Mary Oliver from A Thousand Mornings. It's called Extending the Airport Runway. The good citizens of the Commission cast their votes for more everything. Very early in the morning, I go out to the pale dunes to look over the empty spaces of the wilderness. For something is there. Something is there when nothing is there but itself, that is not there when anything else is. Alas, the good citizens of the Commission have never seen it. Whatever it is, formless, yet palpable, very shining, very delicate, very rare. So now we're going to go into our time of discussion. Not going to lie, I've timed that perfectly. So we've got 4 questions there. How many groups are we today, do you reckon? 3?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so if we have 1 group at the front, 1 group out the back, and 1 group at the back by Andy, that would be grand. I'll need 1. G, got 1?
I'm coming to the front for once.
You're going to the front for once?